Hi, I'm Colin Earhart here with Jason Anderson, about to introduce our 95 HDI F2 for the 98 to 2013 Harley Road Glides.
So what's really unique about this particular product is, just like Metra throughout its years of being in the aftermarket 12-volt industry, we've really branched out into areas like the motorcycle field with our 95-HDIF, which is for the street glide.
Right, it started with the need for doubled-in radio is where it really started. To replace the interfering, you've got to do the entire interfering to get doubled in into the location. So that's where it comes from.
And it seems to be common in the 98 to 2013. Right. We had the street glide covered, so now we've got the road glide, and we're really excited to show you guys the features and the benefits to this particular interfering and the components that it comes with. So let's get into it.
So obviously we mentioned the doubled-in radio. The only other thing needed for that would be a set of radio brackets. We utilize the metal bracket, which you'll see later in this video. That's it for the doubled-in radio. From there, speakers is the key from here. So we've got different solutions. We've got 6x9, 6.5, or if you want to get creative, put your own size, your own, whatever you can fit within this allocation, obviously, into these locations.
One of the best features in this design is how the adapter plates secure to the fairing. They go from the inside and they screw with six
stainless screws. We sandwich together with the speaker and the grill together, so we're actually combining and clamshelling together for a secure fitment.
Yep, so everybody knows Harleys vibrate, they shake, they rattle.
Not to mention the cool grill pattern that we've got here.
Exactly. They're going to hold up over time, so having that sandwiched speaker adapter plate with the grill and the speaker, it's going to be a secure fit. It's going to last a long time.
That's right.
So also you're going to be retaining the 4 OE gauges. So when we go through the installation steps, we're going to be removing the OE gauges and locating into our HDI F2 interfering. Comes with all the mounting hardware that you're going to need as well. So from the black stainless grill screws to the stainless screws that Colin was talking about for the speaker adapter plates.
And the adapter.
And then you know, the radio ISO screws and
replacement screws for the factory radio bracket that holds everything together in the between the inner and outer fairing.
Yep. So we're going to take the interfering. We got a 2011 Road Glide in the shop right now. We're going to remove that factory fairing and we're going to show you how to install the HDI F2. So in preparing the fairing to go onto the motorcycle, we just need to do a little prep work beforehand. Since we know the speakers that we're going to be installing in this are going to be 6x9s, we've chosen the 6x9 adapter plate. So that's going to lay right into the bottom of the fairing. We're going to use the 6 stainless Phillips screws, and we are going to screw those into place.
Because this is easier to do off the bike, although it can still be done on the motorcycle.
Even pressure all the way around. Really no need to over tighten. Just have to make sure that they are tight. Once this is done, we're going to do the other side. And once that's done, we're going to go over to the OE fairing and start disassembly. So now we're ready to disassemble the bike. The first thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be removing the turn signal bolts that secure the inner and outer fairing to the frame.
Those are just 1/2-inch nuts over the signals that come through the fairing and into the other side of the bracket on the bike. So loosen them up.
Now there's a wiring harness that goes in between the inner and the outer fairing, and you'll have to remove wiring enough just to let it dangle so it doesn't scratch anything. Make sure to save the washers that came off with it.
We unplug the signals. Leave that dangle enough where it won't scratch anything when we pull it apart.
Now with the turn signal bolts removed, we can go ahead to the 6 T25 bolts that are holding the inner fairing.
There's 3 on each side.
3
one
on
up top,
each side.
1 in the middle, 1 down low.
Yep, so we've got the T25. As soon as Colin gets his side loose over there, while he's doing that, I'm going to move around to the front and make sure that I hold the front outer fairing from falling. Even though it is hooked to the OE headlight bracket, it's still just best to have two people. Now you should just be able to lift up, release it from the headlight bracket, and we can reach in and unplug our headlight connectors. Okay, set that off to the side.
Now the outer fairing is off. It's time to move on to our wiring and the radio bracket assembly.
We will be reusing these OE T25 screws to attach our fairing back on. So now that we have the front fairing off, a couple things we want to point out. Wire management is incredibly important when dealing with the wiring back behind the fairing. It's very important that it looks exactly the same when our HDIF tube comes back in here.
These two hooks being one of the most important, where your headlight assembly hooks into place.
That's right, and without that, the fairing isn't going to fit on. So if you do have any problems with fitment, once you start to assemble this thing back together, this is probably the area.
Now's your time to take pictures.
Yes, absolutely.
Label wires if you need to, where they go, to what gauge they go to what speaker they go to. Remember where things go.
So one thing I will point out is an indicator that Harley-Davidson put in here was that the orange tape on the gauges, they always go on top. So when we take this wiring harnesses down, we're going to combine these two together. So it may be good to label it brake and clutch, or left and right, whatever orientation you need. So we can go ahead.
Let's get it out of here.
Yeah.
So now the wires are cleaned up and out of the way, unplugged from the inner fairing, we can move on to the actual gauges.
So we recommend taking off one gauge at a time and transferring that over to the HDIF tube.
Unless you think you can remember where they go.
Yeah, and usually, at least I can anyway. So it's definitely going to be one at a time for me.
So for the bracket assembly to go together with the bike, the rear support bracket, just like factory, has, well, this is factory, has keys that go into the keyways on the back of the fairing, just like factory. So we place that on the back, run the gauge through, line it up, make sure we're in the slot so it doesn't spin anywhere, and place the nuts in place. Same thing for all the gauges. And then we're getting ready to go back to the bike. All right, now that the gauges have been removed, the only thing left is the mainstay bracket with the radio in the bracket itself that's holding the inner fairing in place. 4 1/2-inch nuts come off of it, and we're loose at that point, minus the Christmas tree, the 2 panel clips on the inside. So you want to hold on to it so it doesn't come flying out at you. We are ready to go. Wires are clear. Radio assembly and bracket can come out, down and out, and you're clear. Now, we left the radio in for this, but we're gonna remove that radio from the bracket, put the bracket back together with our new radio brackets to fit our aftermarket doubled-in radio where it's going to go.
And this is also where you're going to use hardware that we supplied.
Correct.
With our radio brackets.
Stainless hardware.
To attach back to the factory bracket.
The only thing holding this thing in place is it's sitting on these 4 bolts here. The harnessing is in the way, obviously, and it's going to be a mess. We've got to get this off and that through the hole.
Next, we're going to get the factory radio separated from the OE bracket. And to do that, we're going to use 3/16 Allen and undo all 4 screws. So now we're going to take and attach our HDIF 2 brackets to the radio. It's going to line up standard ISO pattern. We're going to use the ISO screws that came with the aftermarket radio. If you do need help, obviously the right radio bracket would be the brake side, the left would be the clutch side. Now with the brackets mounted, we can line it up inside the radio bracket.
And this is where we will not be using the factory hardware over. We're using the hardware that's included.
Because of the placement of the doubled-in opening within the HDI F2, you'll notice that the radio sticks out pretty far. But that's why we have these brackets and the molded nut certs to attach it to the factory bracket. It's going to offer secure mount, and like I said, you're still going to have access to make some little adjustments here once we get it on the motorcycle.
So now we've got the inner fairing prepped and ready to roll. We're ready to go back onto the bike. Wire management.
Now you want to make sure that the fairing, the inner fairing, is on the outside of the bracket that we use to mount our turn signals. So for mine, there you go.
Got it?
Got it. So now we're ready to put the radio bracket in place. Slide it in there.
Now you got some weight on it. Hold it in place. Nuts back on. And we're safe. It's a good idea not to tighten anything completely down at this point until you're ready. Put it all back together.
You can check fitment on the radio at this time as well. So getting these wires back into place is obviously the most important task for reassembly. So we know this big loom here had the orange tape on the side. We know that goes on the brake side of the motorcycle. So we can start by connecting other light connectors together and make sure that we have everything plugged in.
Yep, we've already done some of those. And then we move on to the gauges and then get our wire management across the bracket and leave it exposed just like it was for factory for our aftermarket wiring. Now that we've got everything where we think we need it, it's time to zip tie it back into place. We've got our factory radio connection, factory antenna connection ready to go for our aftermarket radio, which we'll get to next.
So now one of the products within our saddle Tramp and Access line is a handlebar retention interface. That's going to allow us to retain the OE handlebar controls and control all of our radio functions like volume, seek, mute, all those features that you have on these aftermarket radios. So we have a nice waterproof case. It's got a gasket around the harness, a gasket inside the cover. Board slides in, clicks into place, and you have a waterproof harness.
And we've wired that to the aftermarket radio harness already, and it's got the factory connection on it for right here, and we're ready to plug in and go.
Now one of the plugs that is key to making the handlebar controls work is the 3.5mm jack.
In most cases.
In most cases. For this particular Sony radio, it's a blue O-ring 3.5mm jack.
May not be a bad idea to zip tie that in place.
Yeah, these, especially with how much vibration these things get.
And speaking of vibration, we've also included zip tie mounts for the handlebar control interface as well to go into place. And in this particular radio, we've got plenty of room here because it's an L-shaped DIN chassis. So we've got room to place it in there. We could double side tape it down. We could zip tie it anywhere we want. We've also, in this case, we've removed the factory antennas and we're replacing it with our 40 UA20 amplified hideaway antenna.
And that's just got 3M adhesive on it. Plug our Sony radio in. And we're going to tie up the rest of these wires here, make it look nice and neat, and move on to the next steps.
From there we'll be mounting our 6x9s.
So we're getting ready to mount the speakers. Obviously from our speaker adapters we've chosen 6x9s to go into this motorcycle. The screws that you're going to be using to mount the 6x9 are going to be the screws that come with your aftermarket speakers. The speaker adapter plate already has the locations for the standard 6x9 mounting holes, so really getting these attached or mounted to the bracket will be easy. So now we're ready to install the grill. It's got a nice metal mesh grill. It's obviously got a black finish on it with the Saddle Tramp logo. This is going to be the part of the installation where we're using our black stainless steel screws, and that's so we don't have a nice, shiny looking screw on this.
That's right. And remember, that's what actually ties it all together. So through the grill sandwiches the speaker bracket, mounting bracket from beneath, through the top, holds it all together. So here we're using our hardware to put the grill back into place and sandwich everything together. 4 mounting points. And just like lug nuts on a wheel, I never do one all the way at all.
So now we're just about to start testing our audio. We're going to hook up the speakers. We're going to program or make sure our ASWC program to our handlebar controls. And we're going to test the radio functions just to make sure everything works before we put the front fairing back on.
All right, now that we've got everything wired up where we think we need it, we're going to want to test everything. We're going to turn the bike on, make sure our gauges work properly that we put back into the fairing, make sure our aftermarket radio powers up, speakers are working properly, and also program our handlebar control interface. That's as simple as turning the ignition on.
Once you have the ignition on, interface is going to go through its boot up sequence, and you're going to press and hold the volume up button on your handlebar controls.
Which we're working already, so we're good to go. Make sure we've got sound, make sure all our gauges work properly, which we'll start the bike for that. Time to put the outer fairing back on. So, key thing to note, these fins, as you're placing it on and hooking onto these hooks, very important from the headlight assembly, have to line up with the ones on the bike, on the top side, and the ones on the inside of the new fairing.
If they don't line up, you're not going to get a good seam.
Correct. So we'll start by plugging in our light. Okay, so once we get those fins lined up, we can then push in the signals to hold everything in place. We're hooked here from the headlight assembly, so it's going to keep everything from falling apart. Go ahead and put our 1/2-inch nuts back into place with the washers to hold the signals in the side of the fairing in place, making sure that the fins stay aligned with each other. Then we can run the 6 screws on the other side.
There is a one thing I'd like to mention about the groove. That's where the turn signals go. That's a good spot. That's a spot for you to feed that turn signal wire up into the fairing. So you want to push that up, shimmy that up inside the fairing, and then slide the turn signal on. Now you know if you have everything lined up correctly, if you've got nice seams all the way down either side of your speakers. So we just press this together, hold it, and we can see that the factory mounting holes all line up with our fairing, and that's a good indication that we've got those fins lined up. So we can go ahead and take our T25 and secure the rest of the fairing. So overall, the installation of the HDI F2 fairing went really smoothly, really well.
It did.
This thing was designed and
engineered
here at our Florida facility. And we're really proud of it. It really offers a lot of flexibility to the installer, to the customer, and it has that finished look. The seaming between your OE panel and our aftermarket panel it's just on point. And I think that flexibility is really what gives the HDI F2 the best look.
You got options with your speaker mounting. You can now fit a doubled-in, full-size doubled-in radio. You can do a shallow mount. You can do an L-shaped doubled-in. You got plenty of room for aftermarket amplifiers. The wiring is simple.
Yep.
Handlebar controls are easy. You got 1998 through 2013 of a very popular bike.
Yep. And it's not going to interfere. These changes to the interference, they're not going to interfere with any of your steering. So from lock to lock, you're not going to hit anything. So if you'd like more information on it, you can always log on to the metraonline.com. You can follow us on Facebook, see our Instagram, to find out more about what we have to offer, not only in Metra line, but also in the Tramp line, which is a sister brand of it.
That's right, because we are 12 volt.